twin servants screamed, "Mama," through the punishment cage, until an Apache hunter shattered the bars. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In the harsh and unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier, there were stories that would haunt the minds of those who heard them. But none more chilling than the one that unfolded in a small, desolate settlement at the edge of the desert. The sun beat down relentlessly on the wooden structure that served as both prison and punishment chamber for the unfortunate souls who found themselves trapped within. This wasn't just a place of confinement. It was a symbol of the deepest cruelty. Inside, two young twin servants were locked away, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. Their small bodies trembled as they screamed, desperate for their mother. She stood just outside the bars, eyes wide with horror, unable to do anything to save them. The punishment cage they were trapped in had become their tomb, their cries echoing in the silence, but no one dared intervene. These children, sold into servitude by a corrupt landowner, had known only hardship and abuse. They had been beaten, starved, and now they were trapped in the very thing that had been built to break their spirits. The woman, their mother, had tried to protect them, but her strength had been worn down over time. She could do nothing but watch as her children suffered. The sound of the chains rattling was deafening, but the heart-wrenching cries of the children pierced through it all. She clutched the bars, her knuckles white from the strain, her heart breaking with every desperate scream. Her entire world was crumbling before her eyes, and yet, she had no way of stopping it. As the hours dragged on, the woman's mind raced. She had heard of the wild Apache warriors, fierce, unyielding, and merciless in battle. Yet, there was one among them who was different, a man of honor and compassion, known for his actions that defied the brutality of his people. Little did she know, this warrior would soon be the one to shatter the cage that held her children and change their lives forever. The Apache hunter, known for his swift and silent movements, was a ghost in the desert. His reputation preceded him, and it was said that he could track a person through the harshest of terrains, his eyes piercing through the veil of dust and heat. But he wasn't hunting for enemies today, he was hunting for justice. As he approached the settlement, he heard the screams from within the cage, the desperate cries of the twins, and his heart clenched with rage. He had heard stories of the cruelty of the landowners, but this was a new level of torment. Without a second thought, he moved swiftly toward the structure, his hand steady on the bow as he prepared for what was about to happen. In one fluid motion, he stepped into the shadow of the cage, and with a single, well-aimed shot, he severed the lock holding the door in place. The hinges groaned as they gave way to the force of his blow, and the cage door swung open. The children's cries stopped instantly, and they looked up, wide-eyed with disbelief. For the first time in what felt like forever, they saw hope in the form of this silent stranger. The woman, still outside the cage, watched in awe as the Apache warrior knelt down before her children, his face unreadable, his presence like a storm that had arrived to end their suffering. As the children were freed, she rushed to them, her arms enveloping them in a protective embrace. The warrior stood up slowly, his gaze meeting hers. He said nothing, but his actions spoke volumes. In that moment, the woman understood. The nightmare was over, and a new chapter of her life was about to begin. The Apache hunter had shattered more than just the bars of the cage. He had shattered the chains that bound their fate, offering them freedom and a future they had once believed was lost forever. The Apache hunter stood tall, his presence commanding yet serene. The two children, still in shock, clung to their mother, their small hands gripping her tattered dress as if afraid to let go. The woman, tears streaming down her face, whispered reassurances, though her voice trembled. She had never thought she would see a day like this, never believed that someone would come to save them from the nightmare they had been trapped in for so long. The Apache warrior remained silent, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he were listening to the very wind itself. He had not come to speak words, but to offer the one thing that mattered most, freedom. After a long pause, He turned to face the woman and her children. With a soft grunt, he motioned for them to follow him. They did not question, for in his presence, something told them that they were safe, that he would keep them from the horrors that had haunted their lives. The hunter led them away from the cage and into the rugged wilderness, the land stretching endlessly before them. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the desert floor, but there was a sense of peace that had replaced the tension of the past few hours. As they walked, the woman looked down at her children, their faces still pale from their ordeal, but their eyes now filled with something she had not seen in what felt like forever: hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there, flickering like a small flame in the darkness. The journey was silent, but not uncomfortable. The Apache hunter moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, his every step deliberate and sure. The woman could sense the strength in his movements, but there was also a calmness to him, an assurance that he would protect them no matter the cost. As night began to fall, the group reached a small clearing where the hunter set up camp. He moved with efficiency, building a fire and preparing food with the same quiet intensity that had marked his earlier actions. The woman watched, still trying to process what had just happened. Her children were safe, yes, but where would they go now? What would they do? The hunter seemed to sense her unease, though he said nothing. Instead, he offered her a bowl of food, which she accepted gratefully. The warm broth soothed her, though her mind remained restless. She had no answers, but for the first time in years, she had a sense of peace. As they sat by the fire, the hunter finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You are safe now," he said simply, his words cutting through the silence of the night. "You will not suffer again." The woman looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He had saved them. He had freed them from a life of misery, and for that, she would be eternally thankful. But as she sat there, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the promise of safety, she knew that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was a path they would walk together. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that they might just have a future worth fighting for. The hunter's eyes flickered to the horizon, his expression unreadable. He had done what he set out to do. He had freed them from the cage. But what lay ahead, even for him, was still unknown. The winds of the desert were unpredictable, and the dangers of the frontier never ceased. But as the stars began to dot the sky, the woman felt something stir within her, a sense of purpose. The journey was not over, not by a long shot. But as long as they had each other, and as long as they had the protection of this warrior, they might just survive. The Apache hunter stood, his gaze distant, but his presence unwavering. He had given them the gift of freedom, but it was up to them to forge their own future. The woman nodded, a silent promise passing between them. In this vast and unforgiving land, they were no longer alone. And for the first time in many years, that thought gave her the courage to face whatever was to come. As the days passed, the woman and her children began to adjust to their new life. The Apache hunter had led them to a small settlement hidden deep within the desert, a place where the land had been kind to those who respected it. The village was small, but it was alive with the sounds of people working, living, and thriving in the harsh conditions of the frontier. For the first time in years, the woman felt a sense of belonging. The days were filled with the rhythm of daily life, gathering water, tending to small gardens, and learning the ways of the Apache. She had always been a quick learner, but this was different. This was survival. She had no choice but to embrace this new life, and over time, she grew strong in ways she had never known. The children, too, began to flourish. The twins, once so frail and weak from their years of abuse, found themselves playing in the sun with other children of the village, their laughter echoing in the air. It was a sound the woman had almost forgotten, and it warmed her heart to hear it once again. As for the Apache hunter, he remained a quiet presence in their lives. He never spoke of his past, nor did he seek their thanks. He had done what he felt was right, and now he moved through life with the same calm, measured steps that had saved them. But the woman could see that he was watching over them, silently guiding them as they adapted to their new life. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, the woman sat by the fire, her children curled up beside her. The air was cool, a gentle breeze sweeping through the village. The flames of the fire danced in the dark, casting long shadows on the ground. It was peaceful, almost serene. But there was an unease in the woman's heart, a nagging feeling that wouldn't let her rest. She had seen the Apache hunter's eyes, those dark, intense eyes that seemed to hold secrets. There was more to him than what he let on, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had found here might not last. The hunter approached, his silhouette framed by the firelight. He moved with his usual quiet grace, his gaze steady as he sat across from her. The silence stretched between them for a long moment before he spoke. "You are safe here," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "But the world beyond this place is not so kind." The woman looked at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "The land is vast," he continued. "And while this village is a sanctuary, it is not invincible. There are those who would seek to destroy what we have here." His words struck her like a cold wind. She had always known that the frontier was a place of danger, but hearing it from him, the one who had saved them, made it feel all the more real. The hunter's eyes never left hers as he spoke. "I will protect you," he said, his tone unwavering. "But you must be prepared for what is to come." The woman felt a chill run down her spine. She had hoped that their life here would be a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the horrors of their past. But the hunter's words were a stark reminder that the frontier was a place where peace was fleeting, where survival was never guaranteed. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, the woman's mind raced with thoughts of the future. She had no choice but to trust the hunter, to believe in the safety he promised. But deep down, she knew that the journey ahead would be far from easy. The following days brought new challenges. The woman learned to use a bow and arrow, a skill she never imagined she would need. The twins helped gather firewood and food, their small hands learning the tasks that would keep them alive. It was a hard life, but it was a life she could live, a life she could fight for. One morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, the hunter took her aside. "You must be ready," he said, his voice low. "There are men, outsiders, coming. They seek to take what we have here." The woman's heart sank. She had feared this moment, the moment when their peace would be threatened once more. But she stood tall, her resolve hardening. She would not let her children suffer again, not while she had the strength to fight. The hunter handed her a bow, the wood smooth beneath her fingertips. "You are no longer the woman you once were," he said. "You are a protector now, for your children, for this village." As he spoke, the woman felt a surge of power within her. She was no longer a victim, no longer someone waiting to be saved. She was strong, and she would protect those she loved at all costs. The battle that was coming would test them all, but they would face it together, with the hunter by their side. The world beyond their village was harsh and unforgiving, but they had something stronger now, each other. And that would be enough to survive whatever came next. The sun rose high over the desert, its scorching heat pushing against the small village nestled in the shadows of jagged mountains. The wind kicked up clouds of dust that swirled around the tents and huts, but within the village, the air was thick with tension. The woman, now more than just a survivor, had become something else. She was a protector. The children had learned to help with the daily tasks, their small hands now skilled in tasks that once seemed far beyond their years. The twins, full of life, played in the dirt with other children, their laughter ringing through the air. It was a sound the woman cherished, knowing just how fragile their peace truly was. The Apache hunter had taught her much, not just how to survive, but how to stand tall, to fight for those she loved. It had been weeks since he had warned her about the outsiders who were coming. He said they were dangerous, men who would stop at nothing to take what the village had built. She had hoped it was just a warning, a cautionary tale, but she knew deep down that the danger was real. As she walked through the village, her eyes scanning the horizon, she could feel the weight of the hunter's words pressing down on her. Her children were safe now, but the world outside was unforgiving. She could no longer hide from the truth. There would be no escaping the fight ahead. That afternoon, the hunter returned to the village, his face shadowed with concern. He didn't speak at first, only nodded at the woman as he passed her. His eyes were scanning the land, every movement deliberate, as though he were listening to the very earth beneath his feet. The woman watched him carefully, her heart pounding. She knew something was about to happen, something that would test them all. The hunter finally stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. "They are coming," he said quietly. We must be ready. His words, simple yet heavy, hung in the air like a warning. The woman felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it was here. What do we do? She asked, her voice steady, though her insides churned. The hunter turned his gaze toward the horizon. We stand our ground, he said. We fight for this land, for your children, for each other. We will not let them take what is ours. She nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come so far, and she would not let anyone take her children from her again. She would fight, even if it meant facing the unknown. The hunter's eyes softened as he looked at her. You are ready, he said, his voice filled with quiet approval. You have become one of us. That night, the village prepared for the coming battle. The women, children, and elderly were gathered in the central hut, where they would remain safe while the men and warriors took their positions. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fire, as the villagers worked together, each knowing their role in the upcoming fight. The woman, now armed with a bow and arrows, stood with the other warriors, her heart racing. The Apache hunter had been by her side every step of the way, teaching her how to hold the bow, how to strike with precision. She had never imagined herself in this position, never thought she would stand as one of them. But here she was, ready to defend her new home, her family, and everything they had built together. The night was still, the desert air cooling as the moon rose high above the village. Every eye in the village was on the horizon, watching for the first sign of the approaching outsiders. The woman's breath came in steady, controlled bursts, her hands steady as she gripped the bow. The twins, safe in the central hut with the others, had no idea what was happening outside. But she knew they were safe, and that knowledge gave her strength. Then, in the distance, a figure appeared. At first, it was just a shadow, moving swiftly across the land. But soon, more figures emerged, their silhouettes dark against the pale desert sands. The woman's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figures for what they were, outsiders, men who had come to take what was not theirs. The hunter, standing beside her, nodded grimly. They are here, he said. The woman's eyes narrowed. She would not let them take her family. She would not let them take the life she had built. As the men approached, the Apache hunter signaled for the village to take their positions. The warriors, including the woman, moved into the shadows, blending into the night. The time had come. The battle for their survival was about to begin. The woman's hands shook with anticipation, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She would fight for her children. She would fight for her future. The hunter had shown her how to survive, but now, it was time to show the world what she was truly capable of. The first arrow whistled through the air, striking one of the attackers in the chest with deadly accuracy. The sound was sharp, like the crack of a whip, and it pierced the night with a force that made every heart in the village skip a beat. The woman, her grip steady on her bow, was already moving, her eyes locked onto her next target. The Apache hunter stood beside her, his own bow drawn, but his focus was broader, scanning the battlefield for any signs of weakness in the advancing men. The battle had begun, and it was a fight they could not afford to lose. The village, though small, was strong. The warriors, including the woman, had been prepared for this moment, each one taking their position in the shadows, blending into the night as their enemies drew closer. The attackers, unaware of the danger that lay ahead, advanced with confidence. They had come to take what they thought was rightfully theirs, but they would soon learn that this land was not easily claimed. The woman moved swiftly, her every step calculated, her breath steady as she aimed at another target. Her hands had grown accustomed to the bow, her muscles trained to respond without hesitation. She fired again, and the second arrow found its mark, taking down another attacker. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the moment. This was her fight, her family's fight, and she would not let them fall to these men. From the corner of her eye, she saw the Apache hunter moving as well, his figure a shadow among shadows. He was a force of nature, his every move swift and precise. He fired his arrows with deadly accuracy, each one finding its target with a silent efficiency that spoke of years of experience. The woman felt a surge of pride. She was no longer just a bystander, no longer just someone waiting to be saved. She was part of this battle, part of this village, and she was ready to fight for it. The attackers, realizing they were under fire, scattered into the darkness, trying to find cover behind the rocky outcroppings and sparse trees. But the Apache warriors were faster, more prepared. They moved with a fluidity that was almost unnatural, their movements as much a part of the landscape as the earth beneath their feet. The woman's eyes narrowed as she focused on her next target, a large man who had taken cover behind a boulder. He was trying to get a shot off, but the woman was quicker. Her arrow flew, striking him in the leg and forcing him to the ground. He screamed in pain, his hand clutching at his wound, but it was too late. The warriors were already closing in. She could hear the sounds of the battle all around her, the clash of metal, the grunts of exertion, and the occasional cry of pain. But through it all, there was something else, the steady rhythm of her own breath, the calmness in her mind, the certainty that this was the right fight. As the last of the attackers fell, the woman lowered her bow, her body still tense from the fight, but her mind clear. The battle was over, but the tension in the air remained. The Apache hunter moved toward her, his expression unreadable. He gave her a brief nod, acknowledging her role in the victory, before turning his attention to the aftermath. The woman looked around, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The attackers were all down, either dead or wounded, and the village was safe, for now. But she knew this peace was temporary. They had survived this fight, but there would always be another. The hunter, sensing her thoughts, spoke softly. "We have won this battle, but the war is not over," he said, his voice steady. "We will always have enemies, but we will face them together." His words, simple but powerful, grounded her. She was not alone. She had the village, the warriors, and most importantly, she had herself. As the stars began to twinkle above, the woman knew one thing for certain. She would never be the same. She was no longer just a mother or a victim. She was a warrior, a protector. And no matter what the future held, she would face it with the strength that had been awakened in her tonight. The following days, after the battle, were quiet, but the stillness in the air was thick with tension. The woman stood at the edge of the village, her eyes scanning the horizon. It had been a hard-fought victory, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Apache hunter had warned her, and she could feel the weight of his words more each day. The village had won this fight, but the world outside was still a dangerous place, and there were many more challenges ahead. Her children had returned to their usual routines, playing in the dirt, helping with small tasks, and learning the ways of their new life. But the woman had changed. She was no longer the scared, broken woman who had stumbled into the Apache camp all those weeks ago. She was strong now, and with that strength came a deep sense of responsibility. She had seen the darkness of the world, and she had fought for her family, for her future. The wind howled through the desert as she watched the sun set behind the jagged peaks of the mountains. The village was quiet, but beneath that silence, she could hear the distant rumblings of more trouble. There was something in the air, something that told her the peace they had won was fragile, fleeting. As if on cue, the Apache hunter appeared beside her. He did not speak immediately, but his presence was enough. He stood tall, his eyes fixed on the same horizon she was watching. It was as if he, too, could sense the danger that loomed just beyond their sight. "The land is restless," the woman said, her voice low and steady. "We are not safe yet." The hunter nodded. "You are right," he replied, his voice filled with the same quiet strength she had come to know. "The winds are changing. There are those who will come again." She turned to face him, her gaze sharp. "What do we do now?" The hunter's expression remained calm, but there was a fire in his eyes, an unyielding resolve. "We prepare," he said simply. "We stand ready." The woman knew that this was not the end of their struggle. She could feel it in her bones. But as she looked at the Apache hunter, she also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. In the days that followed, the village worked in unison. The men sharpened their weapons, while the women and children gathered supplies and worked to strengthen their defenses. The Apache hunter led the training, showing the villagers how to move with stealth, how to fight with precision. The woman, now a warrior in her own right, trained alongside them, her bow steady in her hands, her movements fluid and powerful. The time had come for her to fully embrace the life she had chosen. She was no longer just a protector of her children, but a defender of the village, of everything they had fought for. Each day, they grew stronger, more united. But the tension in the air remained, and the woman knew it would only grow as the days passed. As the full moon rose high in the sky, the village gathered around the fire for their evening meal. The children played nearby, their laughter a stark contrast to the heavy silence that filled the adults. The woman sat with the Apache hunter, her eyes scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. She could feel the pull of something deep inside her, a sense of destiny that had been awakened in her soul. The hunter sat beside her, his eyes distant but watchful. "You are ready," he said quietly, almost as if reading her thoughts. She looked at him, a sense of gratitude rising within her. "I didn't know it until now," she replied, her voice soft but strong. "But I am ready." The hunter nodded, as if he had known all along. "The journey ahead will not be easy, but you are no longer the woman you once were. You are a warrior now, and you will fight with everything you have." The woman felt a surge of determination. The world outside was still uncertain, but she no longer feared it. She had learned to fight, to protect, and to stand her ground. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength and courage that had been forged in the fires of this new life. As the night wore on, the villagers sat together, their hearts beating as one. They had come through so much, and they would face the future together. The woman knew that the road ahead would be filled with dangers, but she also knew that as long as they had each other, they could endure anything. The Apache hunter stood, his tall form silhouetted against the glowing fire. "We prepare," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "The world is coming, and we will face it together." The woman stood with him, her heart resolute. She was ready. The village was ready. The battle was far from over, but they would fight with everything they had, and they would win. Because in the heart of the desert, amidst the dust and the darkness, they had found something stronger than fear. They had found each other. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The village had become a fortress, the warriors more organized and disciplined than ever. The woman, now fully integrated into this new life, stood with the Apache hunter as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The air was thick with tension, the stillness broken only by the occasional whisper of the wind and the sound of hooves in the distance. The enemies they had faced before were nothing compared to what was coming. The outsiders had not been the true threat. They were only a precursor, a warning. The real danger was closer, and it was coming fast. The woman's resolve had hardened over the last few days. The fight had awakened something in her, something fierce and unyielding. She was no longer just a mother protecting her children. She was a warrior, standing side by side with those who had shown her what it meant to survive. She had learned the ways of the Apache, and now she was ready to fight for what was hers. As night fell, the village gathered around the central fire. The Apache hunter stood in front of them, his face calm, his expression unreadable. He had said little in the past few days, but his presence was enough. The villagers trusted him, followed his every command. And now, as they prepared for what was to come, they turned to him for guidance. The hunter spoke, his voice steady and strong. "The time has come," he said, his words carrying weight. "We are not just defending this land. We are defending everything we have built. Our families, our homes, our future." The woman stood tall beside him, her bow at the ready. She was no longer the frightened woman who had first arrived in the desert. She was stronger, more confident, and ready to do whatever it took to protect those she loved. The village was ready. The warriors, men and women alike, had trained hard. The children, too, had done their part, learning to hide, to stay silent when the danger came. They were prepared for the worst, but they all held on to the hope that their strength, their unity, would be enough to keep them safe. As the hunter finished speaking, the villagers went to their positions. The women and children were hidden, safe within the heart of the village. The warriors spread out in the shadows, waiting for the signal. The woman moved to her spot, her heart beating in her chest, her mind focused on the task ahead. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the weight of the bow, the responsibility that came with it. She was ready. They all were. Hours passed in silence, the tension building with every minute. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light illuminating the desert below. And then, in the distance, they saw it. The dust cloud rising, the silhouette of men on horseback cutting through the night like a storm on the horizon. The woman's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The fight for their survival had arrived. The Apache hunter stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the advancing figures. His bow was drawn, and his body was poised for action. The woman, too, stepped into position, her heart pounding as she prepared herself for what was to come. The sound of hooves grew louder, the attackers closing in. But they were not ready for what awaited them. The first wave of attackers rode into the trap, and the villagers struck with deadly precision. Arrows flew through the air, finding their marks with the swiftness and accuracy that had been taught to them. The woman fired her first shot, her aim true, taking down one of the attackers who had been too eager, too careless. The battle was upon them, the chaos of the fight overwhelming at first, but the woman's mind remained clear. She moved with purpose, her body trained to react without hesitation. The Apache hunter was everywhere at once, a shadow in the night, striking down enemies with ruthless efficiency. But even as they fought back, the woman knew that they could not win this battle alone. This was only the beginning. The attackers were numerous, and they fought with a desperation that matched the villagers' resolve. For every attacker that fell, two more took their place. The woman's arms ached, but she did not stop. She fired again and again, each shot sending an enemy crashing to the ground. But no matter how many they took down, there seemed to be more. The hunter's voice rang out over the battlefield, his command clear. "We fight until the end. Stand strong." His words were like a battle cry, driving the villagers to fight harder, to push through the pain and exhaustion. The woman's gaze locked with his for a brief moment, and she felt a surge of energy course through her. They were fighting together, and together they would win. The battle raged on, the sound of clashing weapons and the cries of the fallen filling the air. The woman's breath came in ragged gasps, but she kept firing, kept moving, kept fighting. As the sun began to rise, casting a dim light over the battlefield, the attackers began to falter. The tide was turning. The villagers had held their ground. The final wave of attackers began to retreat, their morale shattered by the fierce resistance they had faced. The woman stood, her body sore, her mind racing, but she could feel the victory in the air. They had done it. The village had survived, but the woman knew that the fight was far from over. This battle was only the beginning. The world beyond the village was still full of danger, but for the first time in a long while, the woman felt hope. They had faced the storm, and they had stood strong. And as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came next. The victory from the previous battle felt sweet, but it was brief. The village had survived the attack, but the hunter knew better than to think the danger had passed. As the days rolled by, the air remained thick with uncertainty. The sun rose each morning over the village, casting long shadows over the land. But the peace felt fragile. The attackers had retreated, but it was only a matter of time before they would regroup and return with greater numbers. The woman, now fully integrated into the Apache way of life, stood by the fire, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had seen what was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The strength she had found in herself during the last battle had not disappeared, but now she understood that it would take more than just personal resolve to protect her family. It would take the strength of the entire village. The children had returned to their routines, learning the skills of survival in this harsh land. The twins no longer seemed the fragile children they once were. Their laughter had returned, a sound that brought warmth to her heart. They had adapted, just as she had, learning how to gather, how to defend, and how to live in this new world. But the woman could not afford to focus solely on their happiness. She was their protector now, and that meant preparing for the storm that was sure to come. Each night, she stood guard alongside the other warriors, watching the dark expanse of desert beyond the village. The Apache hunter had taught her to trust her instincts, to read the land like an open book. And her instincts told her that something was coming, something bigger than before. The air felt heavier each day, and the wind carried with it whispers of trouble from distant lands. It was during one of these long nights, with the moon high in the sky, that the Apache hunter returned to the village after scouting the surrounding land. His face was grim as he approached the woman, who was sitting by the fire, her eyes scanning the desert. "They are gathering," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "The attackers have not gone. They are preparing for something larger." The woman stood, her pulse quickening as the weight of his words settled on her. How much time do we have? She asked, her voice firm but filled with concern. Not much, the hunter replied. They are moving quickly. We must prepare. The woman nodded, a fire igniting in her chest. She had no intention of letting her family or her village fall to these invaders. She had fought once before, and she would fight again. This time, she was ready. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The village worked as one, gathering resources, sharpening weapons, and fortifying their defenses. The men and women of the village trained together, their movements fluid and practiced. The children, though young, were taught how to hide, how to stay quiet, and how to protect themselves if the worst came to pass. The woman, her bow now an extension of her body, trained relentlessly with the Apache hunter. He had taught her the art of stealth, the power of silence. She learned how to move without making a sound, how to strike with deadly precision. She had become a warrior in every sense of the word. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly, but she knew that every moment was an opportunity to grow stronger, to be more prepared. As the time drew near, the tension in the village grew thicker. No one spoke of what they all knew was coming, but it hung in the air like the heat of the midday sun. The women and children were hidden away in a safe part of the village, while the warriors took up their positions, eyes scanning the distance. The woman stood at the edge of the village, her bow in hand, watching the horizon. The desert stretched out before her, the harsh winds sweeping across the barren land. She had no illusions about what was to come. The attackers would return, and they would be ruthless. But they were not ready for the village. They were not ready for her. She felt the weight of her bow, the strings taut in her hands. She had fought once before, and she would fight again. The hunter appeared beside her, his face a mask of quiet determination. They will come at dawn, he said, his voice steady. We will face them together. The woman nodded, the adrenaline surging through her. She was ready. The time for fear had passed. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the woman took her place beside the hunter and the other warriors. The village stood united, a strong force against the storm that was coming. And when the attackers arrived, they would learn that they had underestimated the strength of the people they had come to conquer. The woman's heart beat steady, her mind focused. She had found the strength to protect her family, to defend her village, and she would not let them fall. As the battle drew near, the woman knew one thing. She was ready. This was the moment that would define her, and she would not back down. She would fight until the last breath, for her family, for her village, for everything she had fought for. The morning air was thick with tension as the village braced itself for the coming storm. The woman stood tall, her bow in hand, eyes scanning the horizon as the first light of day broke over the desert. The wind whispered across the barren land, carrying with it the scent of dust and uncertainty. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, each thrum a reminder of the fight ahead. The village was ready, every warrior in position, every child hidden in safety. The women had learned to stay silent, to stay low, and to protect their own. She had trained them all, and now, it was time to face what was coming. She stood alongside the Apache hunter, their bond unspoken but understood. He had taught her the ways of survival, the art of battle, but more than that, he had given her something far more valuable, the strength to fight for what she loved. And now, she was ready. The silence of the morning was broken by the distant sound of hooves, the faint rumble of a force moving steadily closer. The woman's eyes narrowed as she watched the approaching figures, her senses sharpening with every passing second. They were coming, just as the hunter had said they would. The attackers had regrouped, and this time, they were not alone. The woman could see the number of riders increasing as they neared. They had brought reinforcements, and they were determined to finish what they had started. But the woman was not afraid. She had faced the unknown before, and she had fought back with everything she had. This time would be no different. The hunter moved to her side, his presence calm and steady, like the stillness before a storm. They are many, he said, his voice low but filled with certainty. But they will not take this land. The woman nodded, her grip tightening on the bow. She had seen the strength of the attackers before. She had felt their brutality, but she had also seen the power of her own people. And she knew that together, they would not fall. As the attackers grew closer, the village fell into silence, the warriors taking their positions in the shadows, their weapons ready. The woman's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. This was her moment, her chance to defend everything she had fought for. She could see the faces of her children in her mind, the warmth of their laughter, the hope in their eyes. They were depending on her, and she would not let them down. The first wave of attackers rode into the open, their weapons drawn, their eyes filled with greed and malice. But they were not prepared for the ambush that awaited them. The warriors of the village struck with precision, arrows flying through the air with deadly accuracy. The woman moved swiftly, her bow raised, her body in perfect sync with the rhythm of battle. Her first shot struck true, taking down one of the attackers before he even had a chance to react. The second shot followed quickly, hitting another enemy in the chest. She could hear the cries of pain as the battle raged on, the clash of weapons filling the air. But she did not stop. She moved with purpose, her arrows finding their marks with deadly precision. The attackers, thrown off guard by the speed and intensity of the village's defense, faltered for a moment, their confidence shaken. But it was only for a moment. The woman's eyes scanned the battlefield, watching as the warriors fought with a fury that matched her own. The Apache hunter moved like a shadow, his bow drawn and releasing arrows with flawless precision. He was everywhere at once, taking down enemies with silent grace. And then, the woman saw him, a man on horseback, larger than the others, his presence commanding. He was the leader, the one who had come to take everything. The woman's gaze locked onto him, and a fire burned in her chest. This was the man who had caused so much pain, the one who had threatened everything she had fought for. And now he would pay. She moved toward him, her feet swift and sure, her bow drawn and ready. As she closed the distance between them, the man turned, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no fear in his eyes, only the arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable. But the woman knew better. She had fought for this land, for this life, and she would not let him take it. With a steady hand, she released the arrow, and it flew through the air, striking him in the chest. The man gasped, his body jerking back in shock, and then he fell from his horse, lifeless. The battlefield fell silent for a moment, as if the very earth held its breath. The attackers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. It was a moment of weakness, a crack in their armor, and the villagers seized it. The battle raged on, but the tide had shifted. The attackers, leaderless and disorganized, were no match for the unity and strength of the village. The woman stood amidst the chaos, her breath steady, her heart resolute. She had faced the storm, and she had won. As the last of the attackers fled into the desert, the villagers stood victorious, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The woman looked around at the faces of those she had fought beside, her heart swelling with pride. They had defended their land, their families, and their future, and they had done it together. The sun rose higher in the sky, its warmth spreading over the battlefield, and the woman knew that the fight was far from over. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. The days following the battle felt surreal. The village, though battered and scarred from the fight, had emerged victorious. The attackers had retreated into the vast desert, and for the moment, peace reigned. The woman stood at the edge of the village, watching the horizon with cautious eyes. Her heart still raced from the adrenaline of the battle, but there was a strange calm settling within her. She had fought alongside the Apache hunters, alongside the villagers, and had felt the power of their unity. It was a power she had never known before, and it gave her strength she never thought possible. But as the dust settled, reality returned. The peace they had won was temporary, and the world outside the village was still dangerous. She could sense it in the air, in the whispers of the wind, and in the distant rumblings from the mountains. The calm after the storm never lasted long. The Apache hunter stood beside her, his presence as steady and quiet as ever. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, never left the horizon. He, too, knew that this victory was not the end. "We have won today," he said, his voice low and measured. "But the land is never still. We must always be prepared." She nodded, understanding. "We will stand ready," she replied, her voice firm. The hunter turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You have become more than just a protector," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "You have become part of this world, a true warrior." The woman felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the weight of the responsibilities that now rested on her shoulders. She had found her strength in the chaos of battle, but she also knew that her strength would be tested again. This was only the beginning. The days turned into weeks, and life in the village began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The children played in the dirt, their laughter echoing in the air. The men and women of the village worked side by side, rebuilding what had been damaged in the fight, reinforcing the walls of their homes, and strengthening the defenses. The woman, however, could not let go of the unease that gnawed at her. Every day, she went out to train with the Apache hunters. Her bow became an extension of herself, her aim sharper with each passing day. The hunter had taught her the ways of stealth, of precision, but now, he taught her to lead. She learned to guide the younger warriors, to strategize, to see the battle before it happened. Her role had shifted from a survivor to a protector of something far greater. She was no longer simply fighting for her family. She was fighting for the village, for the future of everyone who had come to call this place home. The woman knew that the threats would not stop. The world beyond their village was filled with dangers, both seen and unseen. But for the first time in a long while, she was no longer afraid. The Apache hunter had shown her how to face fear, how to turn it into strength. He had shown her that survival was not just about defending what you had, but about standing firm in the face of the unknown. As the sun dipped below the mountains one evening, casting long shadows over the land, the woman stood at the edge of the village once again, her eyes fixed on the distance. The winds had shifted, and with them, the promise of change. The hunter stood beside her, as ever, silent, but present. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice breaking the quiet. The woman's gaze never wavered. "I see the land calling us," she said softly. "It will not be still for long. We must move forward, or we risk being left behind." The hunter nodded, understanding. "The world is vast," he said, "and we are not the only ones who seek to take what we have. But we will not stand alone. We will fight, and we will win." The woman felt the weight of his words, the certainty behind them. She had once been afraid of the world beyond the village, afraid of the forces that threatened to take everything from her. But now, she stood ready. She had become more than just a survivor. She had become a warrior. The village had faced its enemies, and they had won. But the real test was still ahead. The land was calling, and the world beyond was waiting. And she was ready to face whatever came next, with strength, with courage, and with the knowledge that they were stronger together. The battle for their future had only just begun. The village had become a place of strength, not just in its walls or its warriors, but in its spirit. The woman stood at the edge once again, the air cool against her face as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow across the land. The world was vast, and every horizon promised new challenges. But now, she knew she could face them, as a leader, as a protector. She had embraced her role fully, standing beside the Apache hunter, who had been her guide, mentor, and ally through the storms that had tested them all. Together, they had watched the village rebuild after each battle, and now, it seemed, they were ready for whatever came next. The hunter had been quiet in recent days, and his silence spoke volumes. His sharp eyes never missed a detail, and the woman could feel the weight of his gaze, always searching the horizon, always waiting. He had taught her patience, the power of stillness before the storm. She knew that something was coming. It was in the way the wind shifted, the way the land itself seemed to hold its breath. It was a tension in the air, the kind that promised change. The woman had learned to trust her instincts, and those instincts told her that the peace they had worked so hard to build was fragile. One evening, as the last light of the day faded, the hunter approached her, his face as unreadable as ever. "They are coming," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "The world outside is stirring, and we are not the only ones who walk this land." The woman nodded, her pulse quickening at the thought of another threat. She had fought before, but something about the hunter's words made her uneasy. "Who is coming?" she asked. "Others, like the ones before," the hunter replied. "But there are more now, and they are not here by accident. They seek something that we have." The woman felt a chill run through her, but she stood firm, her gaze steady. "We will protect what is ours," she said, her voice unwavering. The hunter regarded her with a long, quiet look, and then nodded in agreement. "Yes, but we must prepare. They will not be easy to defeat." In the days that followed, the village returned to the practice of constant vigilance. The warriors trained harder, the women and children learned new ways to protect themselves, and the defenses were reinforced. The woman was no longer simply one of the villagers. She had earned her place among the leaders, guiding the others, helping them prepare for the coming battle. Her bond with the hunter had grown stronger. He taught her not only the art of war, but the art of leadership, how to inspire others, how to make difficult decisions, and how to carry the weight of responsibility. But as they prepared, the woman couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over her. She could see the fear in the eyes of the others, even if they tried to hide it. They had fought for survival, but they had never faced a threat like this. The land had always been harsh, but it had been their land, their home. And now, it seemed, others sought to take it from them. She sat beside the fire one night, her thoughts swirling as the flames flickered. The sound of the crackling fire was the only noise in the quiet village. The hunter sat across from her, his gaze distant, as though lost in thought. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. The hunter turned to her, his face grim. "We do what we always do. We fight, we protect, and we stand together." She nodded, though a deep sense of foreboding settled over her. The battles they had fought so far had been for survival, but this felt different. This was not just about survival. It was about preserving their way of life, their very existence. And that, she realized, was something worth fighting for. The days stretched into weeks, and the tension in the air grew thicker with each passing moment. The villagers moved with a quiet urgency, their preparations never ceasing. The woman found herself standing at the edge of the village more often, watching the horizon, waiting for the inevitable. She could feel the battle coming, and she was ready. One morning, the air felt different. The wind carried a strange scent, and the sky seemed darker than usual. The village stirred, and the warriors took their positions, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. The woman stood among them, her bow at the ready, her muscles tense. She had trained for this moment, and she would not falter. The hunter was beside her, his eyes sharp, scanning the land. He did not speak, but his presence was enough. They had fought side by side before, and they would fight together again. The first signs of movement appeared on the horizon. The woman's heart skipped a beat as she saw the figures approaching, more than she had expected, but still, they were not ready for the strength of the village. The hunter's voice broke the silence. "They have come, but they will not take our land." The woman's grip tightened on her bow. She felt the weight of his words, the promise they held. This was the moment. The battle was at hand, and they would face it together. As the attackers drew closer, the woman's pulse quickened. The time had come to defend everything she had fought for. The village, the people, her family, nothing would take them from her. With the hunter by her side, she felt the fire of determination rise within her. They would stand strong, and they would fight until the very end. The village was ready. The warriors stood with their backs straight, eyes locked on the horizon, their hearts steeled for the fight ahead. The woman, now a central figure in their ranks, stood beside them, her bow steady in her grip. The tension in the air was palpable, the dust swirling at their feet as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, but there was no fear. There was only purpose. Her training had prepared her for this. The many days of practice with the Apache hunter, the long hours spent honing her skills, learning to fight, to lead. The village had become her family, and she would protect them at all costs. Beside her stood the Apache hunter, his presence a quiet reassurance. He had become more than a mentor. He had become a brother in arms, someone who had fought beside her and taught her how to face the world with strength. His eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon, but there was something else in his gaze now, something that spoke of deep respect. They had been through much together, and now, they would face their greatest test yet. As the attackers neared, the woman could see the numbers growing. They were not the same band of raiders they had fought before. This was something more. The enemies were organized, armed, and determined. But the villagers had something the attackers didn't: unity. The woman took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was not just about defending their land. It was about defending the future of the people she had come to love, the future of her children. She could already hear the cries of battle in her mind, the clash of steel against steel, the cries of the wounded, but she pushed it aside. She had been trained for this moment. She was ready. The Apache hunter moved to her side, his bow raised. "They are close," he said quietly. "We must strike first." The woman nodded, her gaze narrowing. She could feel the stirrings of battle deep within her, her instincts kicking in. She knew what needed to be done. They would strike fast, strike hard, and make it clear that they were not to be underestimated. The first arrow flew, its path true, striking one of the attackers in the chest. The others didn't have time to react before the village's warriors released their arrows, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The sound of battle erupted as the attackers charged, but the villagers were ready. The woman moved swiftly, her body in perfect sync with the rhythm of the fight. She was no longer just a participant. She was leading, guiding the others with her every movement. She took another shot, hitting a man square in the throat. He fell from his horse, lifeless before he could make it further. The warriors around her pressed on, cutting down enemies with their arrows, striking with the fury of a people fighting for their survival. The attackers, though many, were disorganized. The woman could see that their resolve was beginning to falter. They had expected an easy victory, but the village was not the easy target they had hoped for. She moved through the battlefield, her bow never faltering, each shot finding its mark. Her heart raced, but there was no fear, only the clarity of purpose. This was her moment, and she would not fail. But as the battle continued, the woman saw something that made her heart skip a beat. At the back of the group of attackers, a large figure emerged, larger than the others, more imposing. It was him, the leader, the one who had been the mastermind behind this raid. He was mounted on a large black horse, his eyes burning with hatred. She had seen his face before, the one who had led the previous attack. He had come back for revenge. The woman's blood boiled. This was the man who had threatened everything she had worked for, everything she had built. And now, he was here, standing before her. The Apache hunter moved to her side, his expression unreadable, but his presence unwavering. "This one is yours," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with strength. The woman nodded, her jaw set in determination. She would not let him escape again. As the leader moved toward her, she took a deep breath, her body tensing in preparation. He was coming for her, his eyes locked on hers, his sword raised. She did not flinch. Instead, she stood tall, her bow pulled tight, her gaze never wavering. The man charged, but she was faster. She released the arrow, her aim true. It struck him in the chest, knocking him back off his horse. He fell hard to the ground, and the woman knew, without a doubt, that he was done. The remaining attackers hesitated, unsure what to do without their leader. The villagers pressed on, relentless, their arrows raining down on the invaders with precision. Slowly, the attackers began to retreat, their will broken by the fierce defense of the village. As the last of the enemies fled, the woman lowered her bow, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The battle was over. The village had survived, but she knew that the peace they had fought for would never come easily. The world outside was harsh, unforgiving, but they had proven that they could endure. She turned to the Apache hunter, who stood beside her, watching the last of the attackers disappear into the desert. "We have won today," he said quietly, his voice calm but filled with pride. The woman nodded, her heart filled with gratitude. They had won, and together, they would continue to protect what was theirs. The sun set behind the mountains, casting a final golden glow across the village, marking the end of another chapter in their struggle. The battle was over, the invaders had been repelled, and the village stood victorious once again. But the woman knew that this victory, like all others, came at a cost. The days of peace that followed were filled with quiet reflection. The village was rebuilding, the wounded healing, and life slowly returning to a sense of normalcy. Yet the air remained thick with the weight of what had happened and what might still come. The woman walked through the village, her eyes taking in the people she had fought alongside. There were scars, visible and invisible, but there was also a deep sense of unity. They had faced impossible odds and had emerged stronger, together. Her children played nearby, their laughter once again filling the air, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to feel a sense of relief. They were safe, but in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the desert, she couldn't help but feel the stirrings of something else. The world outside the village was vast and uncertain. No matter how much they fought, the threat of danger was always looming, waiting for its next opportunity. The woman understood now that survival was not just about strength in battle, but about endurance, about the ability to adapt and face whatever challenges came next. She had become a leader, not just in name, but in heart. And with that responsibility came the knowledge that the fight was never truly over. She stood at the edge of the village, looking out across the desert, her thoughts turning inward. The Apache hunter had taught her much, about survival, about strength, and about what it meant to fight for something greater than herself. He had been by her side since the beginning, guiding her, showing her the way. But she knew that even the strongest of warriors could not stand alone. They had all become a family, bound together by the struggles they had shared. The hunter approached her, his presence as steady as ever. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. "You have done well," he said, his voice deep and calm. "The village is stronger because of you." The woman felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also a recognition of the responsibility that still lay ahead. "We all have," she replied, her voice steady. "But the fight is not over." "It never is." The hunter nodded, his gaze shifting toward the horizon. "No, it is not. But we are ready." He paused for a moment, his eyes locking onto hers once again. "You are ready." She stood in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. There was no turning back now. She had embraced her role, and she would continue to fight, to protect, to lead. The peace they had fought for was fragile, but it was worth defending. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." He smiled, a rare and fleeting expression. "It was never just me. You fought beside us. You are one of us." And with that, the woman felt something deep inside her shift. She was no longer just a survivor, no longer just someone who had been saved. She was a warrior, a protector, a leader, and she would fight for her people, for her future, for her children. The world beyond their village was still full of danger, but she knew that she was no longer afraid. She had the strength to face it, and with the village by her side, she knew that they could overcome whatever came next. As the night settled in, the woman stood beside the hunter, both of them watching the stars that now filled the sky. Above them, the battle was over, but the journey was far from finished. The future was uncertain, but as long as they stood together, she knew they could face anything. And so, with the village behind her, the woman stepped forward into the unknown, ready for whatever the world had in store. Because she had learned that true strength came not from the battles won, but from the people who stood by her side, and from the unyielding resolve to protect everything worth fighting for. Discover a gripping tale of survival and strength in the harsh wilderness of the frontier in this collection of thrilling Western stories. Follow the journey of a woman who transforms from a fragile survivor into a fierce protector of her people. As the village faces multiple attacks, she learns the true meaning of resilience and leadership. In these captivating Western stories, witness her growth as she trains alongside Apache warriors, faces overwhelming odds, and finds strength in unity. From battles fought under the scorching sun to moments of quiet reflection by the fire, these Western stories immerse you in the raw emotion and determination of those who fight to protect their homes. As the village comes together to defend what they've built, the woman discovers the strength that comes from within, becoming a warrior who will stop at nothing to protect those she loves. Filled with action, strategy, and powerful moments of introspection, this is one of the most unforgettable Western stories you will experience. The challenges of survival in the unforgiving desert will test their resolve, but with every battle fought, the woman learns more about her own power and her ability to lead. Whether in moments of quiet before the storm or in the chaos of battle, these Western stories highlight the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. Through every trial, the woman's journey proves that no matter how fierce the storm, those who stand together will always find a way to survive.